and totally redeem yourself.
Welcome in. It's the game plan. Jason Staples and his movie quotes. Taylor Vippolis joining us in place of Greg Barnes. I'm Tommy Ashley, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. Since Vip, you haven't been on this show maybe once before, I'm going to start with you. First comment, one of the first comments. Garrett Chapman says Saturday is a must-win. Let's go ahead and get that one out of the way now. What you think about that, Vip?
You're looking at this schedule, and when Carolina loses two of their most winnable games, with the goal being get to a bowl game, you're starting to get in that must-win territory as the calendar turns to October. So morale-wise, it's as close to a must-win as you could get, because the morale in that building is at an all-time low right now, and it could still get lower.
Yeah, I don't know about all-time low. I
agree. For 2.0.
Yes, I will agree with that 100%. Jason, we talk about and we joke about must-win games here. Pitt has never won in Kenan Stadium. Pitt has had far better teams against far worse North Carolina teams and still has never won in Kenan Stadium. All that being said, your thoughts on Vip's morale discussion here? I think it's interesting. And Sean Crowley, Greg did not take the show off because he did not want to speak ill of Pat Narduzzi. He is
he's
with
Pat Narduzzi right now.
He's game planning right now with going over a game plan for Saturday. But Jason, the morale factor here.
Before we get to the morale factor, I want to know what the backstory is here with Vip's shirt. Are you trying to signal something here, Vip?
I'm petitioning for Carolina to move to the SEC. But no, I was at Alabama, Georgia, and when you're in Tuscaloosa, you kind of get caught up in the wave. And I saw an SEC shirt, and it had like the cool banners on the background. So I was just kind of camouflaging in with the people in T-Town.
You were at that game?
Yeah.
Friend of mine's son is a senior at Bama.
Yeah, I didn't even watch it. I didn't watch it. I'm just not interested in games early in the year at this point. Just not.
It doesn't matter, but it was.
I'll watch the film. Game. Yeah, that game was completely irrelevant. So I didn't really. I've seen a few clips of it, but then a couple catches of Ryan Williams.
Don't tell the people in that stadium that game was irrelevant because it was rocking in there.
They'll figure it out over the next couple of years, and it'll start to die down a little bit. But
yeah. Get to the subject, Jason. We got to keep you on point.
You wanted morale, right? Well, I'm giving you a little morale, but you wanted team morale. Okay, got you. Okay,
you start off by crapping on literally the best college football game of the season so far, maybe the year. But stay on point. Morale.
It's just too bad the game didn't mean anything. Anyway, so anyhow, so morale-wise, yeah, I mean, I think this is a fragile team at this point for a lot of reasons. They came into the season knowing they needed to play well, but there was a sense that with the new coordinator on defense, with some of the things that they're doing on offense and some of the bodies they brought in, and the size on the offensive line and Hampton returning, there's a sense that can be a physical team, manage to pound teams and play good defense and win games. And I think the last couple of weeks, especially again giving up all the points that they did against JMU, this is a team that had that. As I see it, there are different levels of confidence in sports. There's the level where you're playing with no confidence, and then there's the level where you're playing because you think you can do it. Like, I believe I'm bought in, and I'm gonna invest. But there's still that little bit of doubt because you haven't done it. And then there's the I know I can do this. I've done this. And then there's finally the I'm a champion. I'm just better than you. And I feel like this team is in that, like, there's flickers of belief, and they largely believe, but they don't know. They're not at the level of like something bad happens, things start to go a little bit wrong, and they're just like, yeah, it doesn't matter. You know, we got this. This is a little bit of a fragile team, and you know they're coming along on some things, but you know I think the last couple weeks have tested the belief, and there's some doubt in the minds of some of these players at this point. You can see it in how some of them are playing, where you can see the doubt in the body language. You can see a little bit of that. And I think that's one of the reasons why in this kind of game, it's going to be really important that this team stay, you know, if they can start with an early lead or stay attached early and not go down 10 points in the first quarter, that's going to really matter for this team a lot more than a lot of other teams, you know, that we've seen over the years, because I do think that this is a team that's a little bit fragile on that front in terms of its confidence.
There was an interesting article from the Daily Tar Heel. It was Emma Moon who was reporting about what happened after the Duke game and the scene of the Duke game. And one of the quotes was from Travis Shaw, where Travis Shaw is talking to his position coach, Ted Monachino, and he's saying that things were supposed to be different. I'm not blaming you, coach, but nothing is changing. And to Jason's point, I think you're seeing that play out on the field, where a Carolina team is up 20-0 against Duke, and then Duke scores to cut it to 20-7. And nobody watching that game from a Carolina perspective was like, okay, this team knows how to handle this bit of adversity, or this team is going to respond well to Duke cutting into their lead. The second Duke cut it to 27, it felt like, okay, game on. This Duke team is somehow going to get all the way back in the game. And that Duke team's not that good of a team. So the fact that I think you're seeing the confidence be this shaken against inferior opponents, or inferior opponents to what you would expect with how Carolina is recruited, I don't think it's a good sign. And to Jason's point, you're seeing that doubt and that lack of confidence play out on Saturdays.
Yeah, I think very much so played out in the second half when the snowball started rolling. And I've asked Collins about it a few times, and he's talked about that and guys starting to, you know, Jason, we talk a lot about when the crap hits the fan, you revert to what you are, not what you've practiced or whatever. And if you're a certain way for 3 years straight or whatever, 1 year is not going to break that. You sort of revert. Just that aspect of this, it feels like that's going on with the defense right now. They need a game where they have some confidence and they have some success. Pitt's going to be a tough one to get it in, but that aspect of it can really help these guys if they can get some positivity going.
Well, I mean, frankly, they had a game last week where they had a lot of success. Yeah. I mean, first half, they pitched a shutout against a rival. And, you know, we've talked about this for several years now, 10 years, that in college football, in modern college football, if you hold your opponent to 21 points, you're supposed to win that game.
Yep.
Especially in a game where there's, you know, 11, 12, 13 possessions. You go 11 and 12 possession game and hold your opponent to 21 points, you got to win that game. And so, you know, the problem, I think, partly for the defense right now is that they had success this last week, and then they didn't get the full backing of the offense in terms of execution, and then you start to potentially fracture a little bit. You lose the faith that even if I do my job and I handle things right on my side, that they're going to be able to do what they're supposed to do. And if you start working and looking at what other people are doing, that's not good. That's going to lead to further problems. But, you know, they did have some success. The problem is that the success came early, and then they did give up those 3 scores late in a way that, you know, if you talk to defensive coordinators, you talk to defensive players, the way that they hate to get beat the most is to just get bludgeoned up the middle repeatedly. And that happens to be what Duke did, is Duke just ran the football straight down their throats in the second half. And so even the early success in that game, they didn't get a chance to walk away with the feeling of that early success either. They walked away feeling like they just got out of a heavyweight boxing match and lost. So, they're going to have to figure this out moving into this week, a way to reestablish some confidence and to, again, focus on the positive. I mean, if I'm the coaching staff, I'm focusing on the positives of the first half to get those guys to continue to believe that, look, when you did your job here, when you played with this level of intensity here, look what happened. And I think I think this week you're spending more time on that than necessarily fixing problems from, say, the second half. You still have to do that, but you focus a little bit more on the positives to try to build that team's confidence and improve their psyche a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Let's talk a little bit about, we're talking with Taylor Vippolis, Jason Staples here on the game plan, North Carolina, Pittsburgh, Saturday at noon on ESPN2 in Kenan Stadium. Taylor, this is not the usual Pittsburgh team that folks are accustomed to. I mean, they're going to try to run the ball. Rodney Hammond just ruled eligible, so he'll be there. He's on the thumbnail if folks were wondering who Carolina was tackling there. They've got other guys that can run it. They've got a quarterback, though, that can put it all over the field, and that's something that Pittsburgh's lacked, I think, and has allowed Carolina to have a lot of success in them. What have you seen from Pittsburgh that Carolina's got to figure out pretty quickly on Saturday?
Yeah, the one thing I like about this Pittsburgh team, and one of the things that I kind of wish you got from this North Carolina team, is that even if this isn't like a traditional Pitt team with this Alabama transfer quarterback coming in and being more of that like dual threat type guy, this Pitt team knows who they want to be, and they come pretty close to that every time they take the field. Like under Narduzzi, this team has an identity of wanting to play a physical brand of football, and they don't stray too far away from that. And when you watch this North Carolina team, they don't really have an identity. You don't know what North Carolina team you're going to get from quarter to quarter, or from offense to defense to special teams, or if something is just going to be a disaster for a period of time. So I do think this Pitt team has some things different about their elements, but overall, I think Narduzzi is pretty consistent in who he is and who his team wants to be. They're going to be a team that relies heavily on that press quarters, coverage, and safeties that want to come up and fit in the run game. So if I'm North Carolina, I think one of the biggest things that could help this team is that play action and opening up the field for somebody like Jacoby Criswell. I have the stats from Pro Football Focus. Jacoby Criswell in play action this year, his PFF grade in play action is 83.3 compared to 58.7 with no play action. And that's an NFL passer rating of 139.2 in play action compared to 76 when not. So I think there's some ways that this North Carolina team can kind of attack what Pitt is known for and what Pitt wants to do on a game-by-game basis.
I was going to go Pitt offense first, but Taylor, let's get into this Carolina offense. Jason, we've talked about for years how you beat Pittsburgh, and it's probably the one thing that Jacoby Criswell struggled with the most this far this season. Had one that probably wins the Duke game if he hits the Nesbitt a down the field throw. But Carolina's ability to attack those quarters that Jason mentioned, that's always been a thing. It's always why Sam Howell and Drake May, people in chat talking about there's no Sam and Drake, and Max, the only reason that those two were there. We can debate that. But, Jason, Jacoby Criswell and the Pitt secondary, that matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the one real positive is that Jacoby has thrown a lot of intermediate balls and a lot of the, deep over, crossing routes, dig routes, that sort of thing really well. And that's the sort of thing you have to be able to throw to be able to set up some of the over the top stuff against this quarters type look. And of course, if you are going to get big plays against quarters, the easy way is with the what are called post climb or Yankee concept, where you have a deep post with an over route from the other side of the field coming across. You've got the post dig from the same side or double post from the same side. You got a lot of those sorts of things that you're trying to do to set up that over the top throw that you can get big chunk plays on. Now, the good thing is that a lot of the best yardage against quarter stuff is on those inside, post type throws. And I do think Jacoby has thrown those better so far than the down the field, on the outside of the field, deep balls. But this is definitely something that, this week I would have spent extra time in practice making sure that he's working on putting the right amount of touch under the ball and that they're consistently completing those kinds of passes. So, this is important. But the other thing that they're going to have to do, the real issue to me, is less about Criswell being able to complete those passes, because I think eventually, that shot's going to drop for him, as it were. The real problem is they've got to block the ends. They're going to have to block Pitt's ends, and they've struggled with pass pro on at the tackle position. And Pitt's going to bring whoever they need to bring to produce pressure. That's what they do. And they're going to produce pressure generally with 4. They're going to get downhill with those ends. They're going to put pressure on your tackles. And Carolina's going to have to find a way to protect well while getting guys downfield and making sure that Criswell is throwing. One of the reasons that Criswell, his grade is higher in play action is, I think actually the play action number also includes RPO type stuff as well. And one of the reasons that he's been better in that is that he's not been pressured as much when they've gone play action as opposed to any of the drop back stuff. They've struggled to protect him when he's in drop back. And, if they can protect him in this game, the game changes pretty significantly. But that's a big ask against a good Pitt front. Pitt's always got a good front. And, with what they do defensively. So that's, to me, the big question is how well they're going to be able to protect him to get those shots, set up those shots downfield.
Taylor, my question is, why don't they run play action to Hampton all game? Give it to him halftime, play action the rest. I mean, seems like a recipe when you've got a guy like that. Davion Gauss needs to play more and get worn tread off of Hampton. But regardless, Carolina should be able to run the ball.
My biggest worry with that is teams just continuing to stack the box because they're looking at Carolina's receivers and just saying, you really don't have anybody that puts fear in our defense. You don't have anybody that's going to consistently create separation and win over the top. So when you don't have that, and that was kind of a lot of the discussion that we had preseason, like when some people push back and like, does Carolina really need a true number one receiver? And you're kind of seeing why something like that really helps when you have that Tez Walker or that De'Ami Brown or that Daz Newsome that you can count on consistently to win reps over the top and open up the field for everybody else. Carolina doesn't have that right now, so teams have gotten very comfortable in stacking the boxes and trying to force Jacoby to beat them with those throws over the top. And when you have something like that, you're watching Omarion Hampton. He could be he could be the best running back in the country. He's probably a top 5 running back in the country without much argument. And what you're seeing is teams sending so much pressure and not respecting you in the pass game that Omarion's getting hit 4 or 5 yards in the backfield pretty consistently. And he's a good enough running back to make the first guy miss or even the second guy miss at times. But when that contact is happening so far back in the backfield, the play is basically dead on arrival.
Not sure I've ever seen a running back have more yards after contact than actual rushing yards in a game. Jason, have you ever seen that?
Yep.
Okay, never mind. Jason's seen everything, folks. You see all those books?
It might have been a Javonte Williams.
Could it have been Javonte? It might have been. Jason, how do you combat not being able to block the ends? I mean, we talked about play action and all that, but felt like against Duke, Carolina didn't do anything really to combat that. So as an OC, what do you do?
So one thing is you want to get those guys having to move laterally a lot more at the snap, and you want them to. So one is move laterally, the other is to have to defend the run. The more they're having to sort of move from defend the run to pass rush rather than just being able to get downhill and pass rush to begin with, the better off you are. So, This is why it's easier to pass protect in 1st and 10 than it is in 3rd and 13. 3rd and 13, those guys are loading up and they're in sprinter stance. They're trying to get up the field, and they can set you up with pass rush moves and all that. 1st and 10, they got to defend the run, and then it's like, oh, okay, it's a pass, and then they convert to pass rush. You got to have them do more of that stuff. And I would be trying to stretch this defense horizontally a good bit with jet motion, with orbit motion, with I think this is a game where you can run some option. You can do some of those things. You're just trying to slow those guys down in their tracks. And West Virginia had some success against Pitt's defense, running some jet motion. They scored on one of them actually. Just get that defense trying to defend those outsides, and you want to go downfield, run jet motion to the side that you want to protect the most in terms of the quarterback. Get the end having to worry about that, and also having to kind of work around that guy, and play action it in the backfield, and you've got potential to gain some time there. It's that sort of thing, and screens and that sort of thing can help as well. But the thing about what Pitt does is, because they rush 4 so often and 5 so often, a lot of times the screens won't hurt them as much as you might think, because it's only the 4 defensive linemen getting upfield, and they will have a nose for it in terms of that. Now, you have to run them enough that their nose for it will work, right? That's actually going to help them slow down, so that if they beat your tackle badly, they start have that little doubt in the head of like, wait a second, is this a screen? And no, I just beat him. You want him to wonder a little bit here and there, but it's a mixture of all those things. And then finally, I think you've got to use different formational stuff and some specific protections to chip. You've got to find ways to get an additional, body on there. You want Omari and Hampton to get some opportunities to chip, and you tell him, when you chip this guy, I want you to break his ribs. That's what you're telling. You don't want just like a little get a hand on him. You want to set this up so that your H-back or your running back or whoever's chipping the defensive end, that the offensive tackle knows he's got help out there and kind of guides him to it. And then you have one of those guys stick his shoulder pads right in the ribs. Yeah, that happens 1 or 2 times, and that pass rush will slow down for a quarter. So you do some of that stuff. You align the tight end tight sometimes. You do some of those things to just change up the look, force those guys to have to get around an extra guy, force them to protect their ribs, force them to worry about this or that. You do all of those things. But it's not going to be easy. I mean, because you are compensating for something that you're not as good at as what you'd like to be. And you start doing some of those things. You start chipping with the back, and they'll just bring an extra guy. They'll green dog it. Now they got an extra rusher that you can't block. It's things like that you just have to be aware of. And that means you're going to have to get rid of the football earlier.
Yeah, Jacoby talked about that. He said, every time I get hit, it's on me. That's what a leader does, is they take it all. But Taylor, after this game, Carolina's offense has played well enough to win if who happened? Who has shown up? Not named Jacoby Criswell or Marion Hampton, because those are givens.
I think just the way that Pitt plays the press quarters, you're going to need a big game from your receiving unit. Somebody like Bryson Nesbitt, who has kind of shown consistently what he can do at that like tight end receiver hybrid type position. But then I think somebody on the outside is really going to have to win. So I think this is a game where you can look at, after this game, if you just go to the box score and look at the receiving numbers and look at some of the yards per catch, you have a better idea of how this Carolina team did, because their receivers have been average to below average so far, and that's kind of handcuffed what this offense can do.
Jason, same question. You agree with Taylor, I think. And Pitt doesn't, well, they've got, 5 interceptions on the season, 11 or 12 sacks on the season. They do have some guys that have some significant tackles for loss. They also have number 12 with one of the best names, Cruz Brookins. Remember that name if you hear it called. I guarantee you they'll butcher it. But Jason, who shows up for Carolina on offense if they play well enough to win?
I think it's going to have to be like Vip said. It's going to have to be one of the receivers, and I think it's going to have to be someone other than Nesbitt as well. I mean, it's going to have to be one of those guys that can actually be a breakaway threat down the field a little bit more. Maybe J.J. Jones, but maybe one of your young guys, maybe a Paul Billups, one of those types of guys that is able to get free and make a couple big plays down the field. You're going to have. I think to beat this Pitt team, you're going to have to land, say, 3 or 4 shot plays down the field in order to loosen that defense up a little bit. You're not just going to be able to run Omari and Hampton 30 times in this game and win this game. They will commit 9 guys to the box and take him away if that's what you're going to do. So you have to have somebody that's going to be able to get over the top and get 35, 40 yards or more on, in one shot. And I think you need that 3 or 4 times in order to win this football game. And, odds are it's not going to be, if it happens 3 or 4 times, it's probably not going to be 3 or 4 different guys. It's probably going to be one guy, 2 or 3 times that, puts it together there. So whoever that is, it's probably going to have to be one of the receivers.
Looking at somebody asked about punt blocks. I can't see that Pitt's blocked a punt this year. It looks like they've had 2 blocked. Maybe I could be reading that wrong. Maybe one of you guys can check it while I'm talking about Johnny
Scott
T-shirt.
Dawson.
Huh? What'd you say?
Did you see Scott Dawson's comment?
Where is it? Okay. Johnny T-shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com. I got to stay focused with Jason today. Johnny T-shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com on East Franklin Street. Go see him if you're in town for the game. It's going to start getting chilly. Go get your crew necks and your hoodies at Johnny T-shirt. They got you 10% off if you got a Inside Carolina premium subscription. If you don't, you need to get one. That's a bonus, the 10% off. They always having sales over there as well. Just a great bunch at Johnny T-shirt for all the swag you need. Basketball season. Basketball Media Day is tomorrow if you're watching this live, and you will see what Johnny T-shirt can do for you. National Guys Who Pay the Bills will come back. Oh yes, he's pulled out a Bobby Knight picture to answer your question. I will read the comments shortly, folks. After the National Guys Pay the Bills, this is the game plan. Okay, it's the game plan. We're going to talk about Carolina's defense against Pitt. Let me find this. I think I starred it, didn't I? Scott Dawson says, and let's talk about this, Jason, seriously. If another punt is blocked the exact same way on a scale from 1 to Bobby Knight on a bad call, how upset you will be. If you are listening to this and not watching the YouTube, looks like Jason has an autographed, personalized picture from Bobby Knight he is currently holding up. How you had that handy, I just don't know.
If you have a Bobby Knight autographed picture, you always have it handy.
It's always at your fingertips.
Yep.
So we throw in chairs, or what are we doing if Carolina can't get the punt block situation figured out?
I am bad call against Purdue in the Purdue game. Bobby Knight angry if that happens again. Like I am, finding a way to find a loose chair kind of angry if that happens again, because at a certain point, there's a certain point, you want the team that you cover, and guys that you like, coaches that you like, and players that you like to do well. There's that aspect of things, of course. But certain rooting interests when you cover teams also sort of disappear to some degree, and a lot of people don't quite understand that. But we generally want teams that we cover to do well. But beyond that, what really ticks me off is when I watch things and I feel like there are guys that are getting paid a lot of money, like orders of magnitude more money than I make, where I am thoroughly confident that if I was working part-time, I would put a better product on the field at the specific thing that they're coaching. That really ticks me off. Because look, I'm not Newt Rockne here, right? I don't have, 30 years of college football head coaching experience or assistant coaching experience or whatever else. But if I'm watching something And I see, like, that's just flat out unsound. And they've done this multiple times where, okay, if you're going to go with two shield, you have to diagonal snap that. You have to angle snap that over a gap. And you can do that soundly because then that guy can't get around the shield from the outside. But if you don't angle snap it, you have no shot of getting that off. And when you do that twice consecutively, back-to-back weeks, I'm going, oh baby, what is you doing? Like what? You're being paid for this, and you're being paid a lot of money for this. At some point, the person responsible for punt coverage needs to, make sure that just certain things are sound. That's what ticks me off. So if it happens again, I don't even know. I mean, that's a whole different level of, like, at that point, it's like, I feel like people are stealing money. And, given that I don't make very much money and, it's like, why wouldn't they just pay me to do this, remotely for half the week? Because I could do this. I could make sure that they're not going to get a punt block like that. They might get a punt block, but it ain't going to be like that. It ain't going to be because of that. That's what ticks me off.
I couldn't imagine being on that Duke sideline last week where they're like, hey, we saw what worked against JMU. It looks like it's there again. Let's just try that. And when they block the punt, the Carolina staff is looking like, how did this happen? How could this possibly have happened? When everybody is like, hey, the look you are running, if you keep running that and they keep overloading that side, it is going to get blocked every time, to the point where it's shocking that we're sitting here and just saying, if Carolina gets all their punts off on Saturday, it's a win.
Yeah. If you end every possession in a non-block kick,
it's a win.
It's a win.
And I will say that is the sort of thing that does cost you the belief of your players to a degree, right? When your players ultimately line up and something keeps happening, even though they're doing their job, if they're doing their job and then something keeps happening and there's this intuition, like maybe I don't know exactly why this is happening, but every time we do this and everybody does their job, it still doesn't work. Then you start, like, maybe they don't know what they're asking us to do. Like, maybe they don't understand. Like, that stuff matters at a certain point when that happens. So, yeah, I don't want to, spend too long on this. We probably already have, but my goodness, like, that's where my frustration comes in, because, by and large, this is a very good, I think, a good North Carolina coaching staff. And, you have guys who, they're good position coaches. You've got coordinators who have a lot of experience, and, you've got a defensive coordinator in particular who's had really good defenses basically everywhere he's been. So, and, obviously a Hall of Fame coach who's won a national title. There's a lot on this coaching staff. But then when you have something like that happens more than once at one particular spot, you're just like, dude, you got to be pulling your weight.
Oh, I agree. Go check out Evan Rogers' article on the punting woes. It's not just one. It's not just two. It's not just three. It's the most in the country in, I think, 5 or 6 years span or whatever.
9 since 2019.
Oh, I wasn't going to count them all.
I remember because from that article.
Evan breaks it down.
Like that sticks with you.
The thing is that when they straightened up against Duke and had McGinnis punt conventionally, he averaged like less than 30 yards a kick. So there's some issues. Mack mentioned Osada may get an opportunity. We shall see. I said my piece about the guy that's now at Western Kentucky now that probably should be doing the punting duties at Carolina. But at any rate, let's talk about how this Carolina defense stops Pittsburgh's offense. I mentioned Rodney Hammond earlier. They also have Desmond Reed, who was an All-American at Western Carolina before he went to Pittsburgh. He's had some success.
And he's a good player.
Yeah, I mean, this Pitt team is not a one-dimensional team, but Taylor, they still got running backs that can play. Hammond back, assuming he'll be fresh. He hadn't played all year. It wasn't an injury. It was a suspension. And Reed comes down to North Carolina's defensive tackles. And we talked about them after the Duke game. Taylor, what do you see? What do you expect?
Yeah, this is a matchup where on paper I'm worried for the Carolina defense just because I kind of project this Pitt offense to be somewhat similar to the JMU offense that really took advantage of them, where you saw from the first play in the JMU game, that JMU staff had a very good game plan for what they wanted to do with their running quarterback. And Holstein doesn't really project as a great passer. Like of quarterbacks in the ACC with at least like 120 dropbacks, he's 13th out of 14 quarterbacks. Him and Jacoby Criswell are essentially the same as passers, but of those same quarterbacks that have dropped back that amount of times, according to Pro Football Focus, he has the best run grade from those quarterbacks. So this has kind of been the boogeyman for Carolina defense for quite some time, a quarterback that can run. And then you mentioned getting a running back who averages about 5 yards per carry last season, the transfer from Western Carolina. This team has a lot of talent, and when the focal point of your talent is a quarterback that could open it up on the ground, we've seen that this Carolina team can be exposed to that, and especially if K'Mon Rucker is questionable and his status, I think this defense looks drastically different with and without him.
Jason, you're doing a lot of nodding for the people on the audio version about what Taylor was talking about. Holstein averages 343 yards total offense a game. Almost 300 of that is passing, close to 50 on the ground. Last week, Carolina would not load the box against Malik Murphy. This week, they're not going to be able to, I don't think, against the Pitt running back. But your approach here against Pitt's running game and Holstein when it comes down to it.
Well, I mean, I think stopping the run really isn't all that complicated most weeks. It's gap control. And they've got to hold their water on the interior. I mean, that's really where they got gashed late, in the second half against Duke. And there was some movement in the first half as well. There was some movement in the first half, but they were able to get some stops and get some tackles for loss and create enough havoc in the first half that kept basically Duke from being able to score, from being able to finish drives. Second half, they got tired. I thought they fatigued a little bit, and the difference between being just a little bit pushed around and giving up a seam, but a guy being there quickly enough to shut it down, and there being being half a step late. That happened in the second half. So to me, a big part of this is just your defensive tackle rotation, and so that's Ritzy, that's Shaw, that's the other two, and you're muted, Tommy.
Hester's played well.
Yeah, that's Hester, and Hester's played really well, actually. Given his role, that's Hester. That's the transfer whose name is Harris. These are guys that they're going to have to play really well on the interior, because from what I've seen of Duke is if you end up having to load up, what I've seen of Pitt. Thinking of the Duke game still, but what I've seen of Pitt is if you do have to load up against them to stop their running game, and the thing about it is that the new back, the transfer Desmond Reed, he's all of like 5'6" or 5'7", 170 pounds. He's small, but he can go. Like, he can really move, and he's got good vision. If you have to load up to stop them, then Holstein, their quarterback, is good enough to cause you problems, and they've got receivers who can run. So, it's not quite what you faced with Duke. Like you said, Vip, this is closer to what you faced in JMU than what you faced in Duke. And especially since, Holstein, I don't know if he says Holstein or Holstein, but he's a guy that actually reminds me a little bit of Sam Howell in terms of how he scrambles. You know, it doesn't always look pretty, but he finds space and then just doesn't go down real easily. You know, there will be a guy with his hands on him in the pocket, and then he just kind of wriggles away from that and then works his way upfield. And you're sitting there pulling your, you know, whatever hair you have out as a coordinator because he's just made a sack into a 12-yard gain for a first down. And that's stuff that, you know, you've got to finish when you get him in the pocket. They haven't been great pass protection wise, but he's helped make them right a lot. They're going to have to finish when they get back there and do that as well. So a lot of this to me, Tommy, is just win the battle up front. And I know that's simple, but I mean, football's a simple game sometimes.
Indeed. You're talking about Holstein. If we mispronounce his name, apologize to the young man. He wears number 10. He's 6'4", 225. He looks familiar, and he plays somewhat similar as well. Vip, questions in the chat. Somebody asked, move Huzzy back to star. I've seen this question a couple times over the week. My question is, you move Huzzy back to star, who's the corner that steps in for there? And there's not one that I've seen. But Taylor, the approach on the secondary, I feel like Carolina, they're still picking on Caleb Cost, who made a few plays against Duke. But the approach back here, we know the defensive line's got to play, and they've got to show up with or without Kamen Rucker. But the secondary's got to show up too, the safeties and the corners. Your thoughts here, and then I want to talk about Amari Campbell and Power Echols because I think they're going to have a lot to do on Saturday as well. But the secondary for you, Vip.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with moving Huzzy to star. You can move him to star, but the problem is you still have to slot somebody into that corner position. And the offensive coordinators aren't going to see you move Huzzy to star and like kind of be shocked. They're just going to find who you replaced him with and then start attacking that person with a lot of regularity. And I do think Allen and Cost have held up. They haven't been like perfect, but they've been there to make plays. I think the bigger worry in this secondary is their missed tackles, where you have players at the safety position. Carolina missed 20 tackles in the Duke game, and 5 of them came from one position at safety. When you're watching this Duke team score on these longer plays, a lot of them are like maybe plays that you could live with being like a 5-yard gain, but somebody takes a bad angle and then all of a sudden the corner is pinned by the receiver and your safety misses the tackle, and then a 5-yard gain turns into a 25-yard touchdown. So for me, it's not as much the secondary has to get better in pass coverage. They just have to be a lot better in run support and then tackling in that open field.
Yeah, Stick Lane, I believe, had 5 of those missed tackles himself on Saturday. It's bizarre how they go from making plays and then all of a sudden it's like somebody turned the faucet off and nobody knows what they're doing. Jason, I've got a question in chat. First of all, let me get this one out of the way. Gary Chapman asked, is Randy Clements back? Randy was in the booth against JMU. He was on the field against Duke. Obviously, if you paid attention to his Inside Carolina, he's had some health issues, but he was there with the team both the last 2 games. And haven't heard anything update on that. Jason, here's a question for you. This is something that it's another one of those questions that people said, you know, Adam Smith or whoever's got to ask Mack Brown about the penalties. Well, they did. The answer is what the answer is. But how do you get the penalties out of these guys? We talked about it here. There's some penalties you can live with. Knocking the hell out of somebody at the end of the whistle, aggressive penalties, but pre-snap penalties, holds down the field, called or uncalled or rightly called or whatever. How do you correct penalties, Jason? Because Carolina has refs at practice. We hear about that. We've seen that. Short of yanking guys off the field, how do you correct it?
So there are a few things. One is I think a lot of penalties are the result of just a little bit of fatigue or conditioning, where, and I don't mean necessarily physical conditioning. What happens is when everybody gets tired. What happens is when you're not used to doing certain things when you're tired, you don't do those things as well. Right? So we've all had our golf swing come apart a little bit on the, at the end of a round where you walk 18 on a long course. We've all, most of us who've, played a sport, you end up having coaches who work on specific things when you're tired. So, this is the end of basketball practice. You run sprints and then shoot your free throws. And then you run some more sprints and then shoot free throws, right? Why do you do that? Well, in games, like, it's one thing if you're working on your free throws all the time and you just get really good at free throws. And then what happens when your heart rate gets up and you're tired and, your form comes a little bit loose and you start, that's when you hit back iron or you hit just a little short, things go a little bit wrong. So you do that. What we used to do was we had actually at the end of practice or at the end of mat drills, our off-season conditioning program and things, we had flip drill where guys had, when you're at your absolute most tired, we had to do a specific drill where everybody had to do exactly the same movements, down onto the ground, up, flip over, these sorts of things, all in unison, basically as a test of mental discipline. And if one guy out of 100 guys in practice, if one guy flipped the wrong way or was just slightly out of sync or off, we all restarted. And you'd hear everybody, you'd hear a bunch of swearing. You'd hear, and all of a sudden the accountability's there. And you don't want to be the guy who's the reason that everybody restarts. So this is the sort of thing that I do think with teams that are highly penalized, my theory for a lot of this for pre-snap penalties, and this is one of the reasons why veterans tend not to have this problem as much, is because they played more ball and they've been fatigued and had to make those decisions and had to, have all these things going through their head while their heart rate is way up. And then, they're doing all this and they're not jumping off because they've been there before. They've got control of that. You have to find ways in practice to put guys in those situations where you turn up the tempo, you get them a little bit tired, and then you ask them to do things like, we're going to have a hard count. We're going to work on our get off, guys. We're going to work on our get off defensive line, and you run them a little bit, you get them up into a lather, and then the next period you're working on get off, but then you hard count them a couple times. And then if they screw up, you make it group punishment so that it starts to be a matter of accountability in there. You're accountable to the other guys who don't want you to screw up because they don't want to have to do that punishment with you. And you become the object of their disgust or whatever. That's the sort of thing I think you have to do. Harder to do in season because you can't get guys so tired in season. You can't try to grind guys up like that. So in season, it's harder to fix, but you do have to find ways to put pressure on guys and to get pressure on them when their heart rate is up in practice so that they're used to dealing with all that stuff, all going through their head all at once. And then when they get out there, they're more accustomed to that.
Our pressure and accountability thing that we had for our North Carolina team was it was called Tar Heel Circle, where on Sunday you would come in and it was the only thing that we had on Sunday. And it was basically the coach would call you out, you would run in the middle of the circle, and then he would hold up a number where it's how many times you let the team down, whether it was a loaf, a missed assignment, a penalty. And it would be I would run to the middle of the circle and I would see Coach Brewer put up an 8, and I'm like, damn, I let the team down 8 times. And it was my name's Taylor Vippolis. I let the team down 8 times, and then it was 8 up downs. And when you're getting that kind of attention, there is a bigger emphasis on hey, I don't want to get out in that middle of the circle and say a high number and embarrass myself. And the flip side of that, when you get called out and you run to the middle of the circle and the coach puts up a 0 and everybody's clapping for you. Yeah. That's an awesome feeling. And you want those awesome feelings to kind of continue over. So that was just one thing that we did. And something that I think if you talk to the players on our team, we like because of that accountability.
Now, I will say, I'm seeing comments here saying you can sit him a few plays after a penalty and all that. And I actually think, by and large, that doesn't tend to be very effective. The reason that tends not to be effective is that it doesn't actually get to the root of the problem. You know, these guys don't want to screw up, right? And you put them on the sideline, and they're not dealing with it's not actually getting to why this is happening. And I tend to think that, again, most pre-snap type penalties, the kind of penalties that we're really talking about here, now, if it's a stupid penalty, you hit a guy who's 2 yards out of bounds or whatever, yeah, you go sit down. You might sit down for the rest of the game. You sit down, like, that's different. But if we're talking about just the kind of like false starts, the, you know, jumps off sides, you know, some of the stupid stuff that of that nature, the pre-snap type things, pulling a guy after that, I mean, he's already kicking himself. He's already frustrated. And you pull him, and now he's just sitting there stewing, but he hasn't actually you haven't made him any better. You have to get better at this by drilling it in practice, by, again, putting him in situations that make him have to make decisions with the heart rate up and the pressure on him. Because the reason a guy jumps offside is because he's focused on something else, right? The reason an offensive tackle false starts is he's sitting there going, okay, you know, I got 51 protection, 51. Okay, he's the Mike. All right. Oh, there's a safety there. He's coming down. All right. So that means I got to shift to this guy. And then he's, you know, and that guy really gets off fast. I got to get a jump. Oh, shoot. And you forgot the snap count because you're not thinking snap count. You got 3 or 4 different things off in your head at the same time, and everything's going really fast and your head's swimming because you're breathing hard and all this. And that's when you jump and the crowd is going and all that. So what do? You have to practice putting guys in those kinds of situations. Again, the coach's job, as much as anything else, the job of a good coach is to put a player in harder situations in practice than what he's going to see in the game. You want guys to go into games feeling like the game is easier than what you put them through every day in practice. Mm-hmm. That's what you want. And sometimes that can't be done. Sometimes you just don't have the talent to put in front of that guy where, like, you know, suddenly you're playing Clemson and you go, yeah, that's harder than our days in practice because they're better than us, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes that happens. It's about to happen down in Tallahassee, it looks like this week. So, you know, sometimes that happens to you, but other times it's just a matter of, again, you put those demands on players. You put a lot on them in practice so that they're used to it. And then in games, you actually put a little less on them. And it makes it easier, and you're going to see fewer mistakes and fewer penalties as a result.
Yeah, I think you bust their rear ends in practice like we talked about, Vip. I think, you know, peer pressure is a hell of a drug. I think that is a big thing. And to your point, Jason, before I move on from this, is practices need to be harder than the games. And I'm not sure that we can say that much around these parts. Could be wrong, but you get what you allow, and we see a lot allowed. On the dead ball penalties, Steve Blakely in the chat mentions that. You do something stupid, slam somebody, get a post-snap penalty or a post-whistle penalty and all that, I think you got to come out. You can't run that guy back out on the field when he's cost you 15, especially if it's an upperclassman. I mean, period, it can't happen. So anyway, it is time for me to talk about congruity. Take your pencils out and write your score down. Vip, are you prepared to write your score down?
My game score?
Yep, you got to do it before the other starts talking. I'm going to write mine down.
Okay.
And for the record, Buck Sanders, if you're listening, I wanted to pick them last week.
I don't think I have a pen.
All right. I've written mine down. I'm going to talk about congruity. Matt at congruityhr.com. Sponsors of this podcast, sponsors of Inside Carolina. Great guys. Vip, don't choke on pin top here on live on air.
Yeah, I'm right on a highlighter. I
think. Matt is great for your small business. You got a small to mid-sized business, you email Matt at congruityhr.com. He'll give you a free assessment if you're an inside Carolina person. They have all the technology and all the customer support that you need to grow your business. They handle all the heavy lifting while you grow your business, and they've done it for themselves. They make themselves a national brand. They can make your small business here in North Carolina or the world be the same thing. Matt at congruityhr.com. Folks in the chat, throw your things up. I'm gonna go first, so nobody can question mine. I'm going 36-23 Pitt.
What was your score?
36-23 Pitt. I hunt scorigamis. I think Carolina plays well in the first half, but a similar thing happened against Duke, and I think Pittsburgh's just got too many different weapons. And I think Narduzzi has finally wrapped his head around that you can actually throw the pigskin downfield and win a football game. I will never forget James Conner running wild against Carolina, and he stops giving him the ball, and Carolina comes back and wins. I don't see that happening with Holstein, Reed, and Hammond, and the defense for Pitt does just enough. Vip, since you're new to this one, you're going first.
I've got 34-24 Pitt. A lot of the same reasons that you mentioned, Tommy. I think, again, this Pitt offense kind of reminds me of James Madison's offense, and we saw how much trouble that gave Carolina. I think the biggest thing working in Carolina's favor is that it is a home game. But I do kind of question what the atmosphere is going to be like when you lose to James Madison and then you blow a 20-point lead to Duke. And it's a lot harder to convince people to come out. But, you only have so many Saturdays, and the people that love Carolina football are going to still love Carolina football. So I just think that after what I saw the second half in the Duke game and for the entire James Madison game, I have a lot of questions about this Carolina defense, and I don't necessarily trust the receivers to keep pace if this turns into a shootout type game.
Jason Staples, you're up.
I'm going to go out on a limb here.
Well, wow. Carolina 34, Pittsburgh 31. Tell us why.
So one of the reasons is when I look at this Pitt team, I see a team that they're 4-0, but they had very nearly a Hail Mary, essentially close to a Hail Mary on what, 2nd and 30 or whatever, that got thrown 45 yards or whatever into the end zone, where they just ran trips down there and played, 500. And their guy came down with the ball, and then they were able to, get a stop and then get downfield and score again. But that was against West Virginia. They were able to get that win, but they snatched victory from the jaws of defeat there. They snatched victory from the jaws of defeat at Cincinnati, and it's not a bad Cincinnati team either. But this is a Pitt team that's kind of been playing on the edge a little bit, and I think they're in position where maybe the ball bounces a little bit differently. I'm kind of expecting a little bit of reversion to the mean from Pitt, just in terms of some of that. Maybe that's wrong-headed thinking, but my thought is that a couple of the things that they've managed to kind of pull off so far this year, maybe they don't do against Carolina this week. And I think Jacoby Criswell actually has himself a game in this one. The other reason that I did this is when I picked this is when I went through the West Virginia game. West Virginia was able to run the football. And, that was significant to me. I mean, if Carolina is going to win this game, they're going to have to be able to run the football. Cincinnati ran for 4.08 yards per carry against Pitt, and West Virginia ran for 4.18 yards per carry against Pitt. And that tells me that this Pitt front, and when I was watching them, when I was prepping for this, when I was watching them, my impression is that they'll still get after you. I've still got concerns in terms of being able to pass protect against their edges and all that. but I'm not sold that they are up front what they have been against the run. And if they have to sell out against the run, I think Criswell can make some plays with his arm in this game. So I think Carolina's going to have a chance to score some points. And, I think they'll have a chance to get out early in this game. And if they can do that, then they're in position to, it's a home game. They're in position to potentially be able to do some more damage than might be expected. I'm just not fully sold on this Pitt team. And I think Carolina's got a quarterback that can finish it. Now, special teams is another thing, right? I do think Carolina kicks, they've got a quality kicker, and that helps. That was actually another factor here. I've got this as 31-34. There's not a lot of punting in that game. If this is a game where there's a lot of punts exchanged, Pitt's probably winning that game.
To be honest, it's tough to pick against Carolina at home against Pittsburgh. But I'm going to stick with 36-23. I'll probably change it by Saturday at the Inside Carolina Live tailgate show.
Vip's so you have to do it. Play both sides.
Yeah, got to, lay money on both sides. Can't lose.
And then you just clip the one and you just clip the one that was right and post it on Monday.
Absolutely. So, Buck, I might change my number here before your column runs, and I edit it so I can change it to what I need to. Carolina, Pittsburgh, 12 o'clock noon. That means Inside Carolina Live from the Bowls lot starts at 9 a.m. So bring your mimosas and tequila sunrises and sunrise biscuits to the tailgate there in the Bowls lot. Johnny T-shirt and congruity. That's Taylor Vippolis, Jason Staples. I'm Tommy Ashley. It's always been fun. Everybody stay safe. And like I said, every show since, if you haven't, help out with the hurricane relief in some way or form or fashion. Everybody be good.